I'm Scott Walsh from Team Cornerstone. I work on design and also the market research component of our firm. We're primarily a multifamily developer in New York City with expertise in new construction and also conversion of existing buildings into new uses. We did a lot of financial district housing in the mid-90s when no one lived in the financial district. So if some of you are doing things on 24-hour cities, we started doing that for the financial district a long time ago. We have our colleague from the Downtown Alliance. What Team Cornerstone has built here is we have built all of the buildings on the north, we call the north end of the site, which was originally a Pepsi bottling factory, and prior to a Pepsi bottling factory, it had actually been oil refinement pre the 1930s when Pepsi was here. Pepsi, through the 50s, had their research and development world headquarters and bottling on this site. And if you know Joan Crawford, the famous actress, when she was married to Alfred Steele, when the headquarters was here before moving to Park Avenue, this is where their offices were. She remained on the board till her death in the 70s and did maintain an office in Long Island City through that period. Pepsi did a kind of a suburbanization of our country, moved to purchase New York after they were on Park Avenue, which that's a different kind of story of consumer products. We built seven buildings, which we will kind of, in our tour in a little bit, walk around. It's 3,300 units of market rate housing. It's a little under 200 of it is a condominium, which were opened in 2009. We did our site acquisition in 2000. We started negotiations in 2001, completed it in 2003. And even though, as we started talking about, this historically was a site that was up for condemnation, we worked directly with Pepsi to buy the site from Pepsi rather than the site going through the condemnation proceeding. There were, going back to the 80s, the original reason that this site became a prominent site was the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which is a bi-state agency that's really responsible for our bridges and tunnels, has to generate revenue, and you know this even better than I do, has to generate revenue to maintain our roads, bridges, etc. One way they did that was through the World Trade Center, which was a Port Authority property, and they did it through other properties. In the case of waterfront development, in the 80s there was a Port Authority, what do you call the person who's in charge of the Port Authority? The executive director of the Port Authority was very kind of inspired by Ghirardelli Square in San Francisco, which had been built in 1964, and wanted to do waterfront development in New York. Because it's a bi-state agency, it also, though, had bonding capacity. Hoboken, New Jersey, which is a mile or two to the west, had a waterfront redevelopment plan that they were ready to execute, but Hoboken had very tenuous finances at that point and no bonding capacity. Hoboken then went to the Port Authority to use their bonding capacity. However, the governor of New York and the governor of New Jersey both have to sign off on any type of revenue raising for the Port Authority. So as kind of in politics, the governor of New York is not going to sign off for New Jersey to get $100 million in waterfront redevelopment. There was a kind of a quicker, so Hoboken had its site. New York then started looking for their site, and this site, in addition to its views, great transportation, which we can talk about further, was identified as a very good site because it only had 5 landowners. Pepsi and Daily News being the 2 biggest landowners, and there were 3 smaller landowners. So if the city and state had to have gone through a condemnation, it was only on 5 people, not obviously hundreds of people or potentially lots of business owners. Daily News site is more to the south, which is what became the Olympic site, and which was actually the first site that was purchased, even though it's the last site to be built out. And then our site, the Pepsi site, was the northern site, which is the 7 buildings that we will walk through. And I have a little bit of, we can kind of hand these out really quickly. Just one thing that people kind of sometimes think about as far as a kind of, in your cities, this site, all these red dots on here are the places we can get you to in 5 or less stops. So within less than a half an hour, and sometimes as short as 5 minutes, you can get to places in the city that if you lived on the Upper West Side or the Upper East Side, you could not get to as quickly. So there's a very big transportation story here. This is just kind of around 1911, 1912. The Queensboro Bridge opened in 1909, which was really, until the Queensboro Bridge opened, there was really no access to this site. So if you want to kind of pass those around, you can see this. That's the bridge. It's because of the fog, you kind of
now the Edcott.
Now the Edcott Bridge. What we're standing in front of now are two historic gantries, which you can see here. You can see them from both sides. So they were for loading cargo coming from Long Island. And again, Long Island was much more industrialized than people think of it now. Actually, there was a lot of industry, especially in the center. And then on this other side, you can kind of see our site, which was the Pepsi bottling plant, and then just the mnemonic of Joan Rivers and Alfred Steele from here. Joan Crawford, sorry, Joan Crawford. And we'll see a site model, but this is just another thing. One of the bigger moves that we had kind of worked with the state on was, this is the original plan. Which are you the original plan?
This is the master plan that Scott referred to, the architectural master plan, and then it's the open space master plan that was a very important component to it, because at the time this development was being proposed, they were looking at the success of Battery Park City. It was the model. The bar had been raised to that. But one of the interesting parts of that was it was a perfect example of why you build parks first and let development follow. And it's continued to be a great model in that respect. And hopefully this park will be the next one, and so on and so forth. As we were doing this, of course, when you're having a conversation with because our work involves a dialogue with the community, the constituents of a park. Well, there were no constituents except 1- and 2-story buildings and residents back there who were vehemently opposed to, I think it's safe to say, vehemently opposed to any of this development. Therefore, we couldn't engage them in a conversation about the parks at the time. And understandably so. I think they felt that any conversation about the parks was to endorse them, which in turn was to endorse the development. So it was quite complicated that way. But we relied mostly upon task force meetings with the Queensboro president and other local representatives to get a sense of programmatically how the whole park should lay out as that kind of catalyst for development. And it really amounted to an active recreation at the southern end, recreation node at the southern end, and one at the northern end that was part of those residential, what was planned as residential components. There was a four-block commercial core that was planned where that building is going up. And this was the first stage plaza that anticipated having a lot of retail around it. The site you see with the blue fence was originally going to be a residential site with retail on the base, which would have activated this plaza even further. It's now going to be a new library for Long Island City, which is going to be fantastic.
Will it have any retail component to it?
I'm sorry?
Do you think it won't have the retail component to it?
No, but there's a lot of retail popping up, so I think we're in good shape that way. So this was the original plan. And then to follow the timeline, then this was the first thing built. Some development started, what's that one called? The first
Avalon Riverview.
Avalon Riverview was built. Oh no, City Lights.
City Lights was
right.
1997.
And then there was the proposal for the Olympics. This was going to be the Olympic Village site, which we're now calling Hunters Point South. Just to give you a sense, Scott kind of listed all the partners in the development of the master plan. We, as the park designers, were anticipating that the Queens West Development Corporation would be the ones who would be maintaining all these parks. There was no such thing as state parks in the conversation at all. So it was only after we had completed all of our drawings and this park was under construction, actually almost after it was constructed, this first phase that you're sort of sitting in, only then were we given parks, state parks, as the new operators.
And we were just handed, and we didn't.
And you were just handed this.
Yeah, we didn't get to interact.
So
with them.
it wasn't ideal. It wasn't ideal.
Tom,
what?
Sorry, one question. You said that what was the date of the original plan?
I'm sorry?
What was the date of the original? Roughly.
Yeah,
It's 1983
1983.
that the decision is made that there's going to be this dual bonding.
Right.
Yeah.
And then that starts the planning
but the
process.
plan didn't actually get approved. Our contract for this park didn't actually start until 1992. And I think this whole master plan was approved late 80s. I'm thinking 88 or 89, something like that.
And then this one comes in 1997. So you see, they get approved. It takes 5 years to get the first building built. After the first building was built, the second building took another 5 years.
Right.
Took us another 5 years. It's a 30-year project. It's a great project, but it's a 30-year project.
But
one
it's
of them-
moving.
Does
That's
one of them
the-
have a school in it? Is that the one with the
If
school?
we're point out, there's numerous
You'll see, there's
schools
a
throughout
new
the
school
whole
down there I'll
campus.
take you to.
Originally-
Kindergarten through high school will all be walking distance from
Yeah.
Center Boulevard.
But this started out, right?
There's-
Now,
If you came down here at night, all the teenagers in the neighborhood were down here doing their thing. And I had a lot of time, a lot of fun talking with them. But the transformation from this to this, and actually it's quite amazing that, I think anyway, that a combination of the great detailing that we did for the park and the great care that State Parks is doing here. This is a hugely successful park 15 or more years after it was built, and that's hard to say in a rough and tumble city, especially on a site that is not on the beaten path. It's a little bit remote. Of course, development's coming now, but in the early stages, it really had to stand the test of time. And what you'll notice in the detailing is it's rugged. It's sort of blue-collar, working man kind of detailing that reflects the heritage of this place, which wasn't all Pepsi. It was where we're standing. It was all about railroads. The rail lines came right down that street. Many of the rail lines came right down that street, and that's, of course, what this is all about. So this was the Pepsi sign for the rail lines. This is their icon. They've since, of course, stopped coming here, but they left their mark here and their history and their heritage, and we wanted that detailing to reflect that heritage. And I think as you move around, without signs telling you exactly what happened here, I hope anyway you'll feel and sense the whispers of the rail presence on this site.
Does everybody understand what these did?
They had to figure out a way to get boxcars from here across the river and then across over to New Jersey. And the way they did it was this engineer, and if you went over to another park we did on the west side, Riverside Park South, it goes from 59th to 73rd Street, you'll find this same gantry over there. And what they did was they basically figured out a way to, you'll see these, the markings in the paving are actually striking where the train tracks were. And they came back to what is like a hinge. That entire thing was a deck with big I-beams, and the rail cars would be pushed out onto that deck, and that deck would be lifted up and down through the mechanisms up there and aligned with a rail barge that would have been out in the East River. And that barge, we have tides, so it wasn't easy. You know, you had to align it. Now, I didn't want to be the guy that had to push the spike and align those rails, but that's what happened. They would align the rails from land here. It was on this tilt to a barge there. That barge would go over to New Jersey, have the same mechanism over there, and that boxcar would then just move on its way out to Iowa or wherever it was going. And that's what really became the economic engine of Long Island and Long Island City, was the ability to connect this place in an industrial way, in an industrial transportation way to the world, and that was done right here at this site with these gantries. That's why it's such an important site for the history of Long Island and Long Island City.